Welcome to the Canadian Anti-Semitism Education Foundation's Web Talk, 1948, the Founding of Modern Israel, presented today in cooperation with DEIN, the Democracy and Information Association in Germany. I'm Andrea Spindle, Executive Director of CAEF and co-chair of End Jew Hatred Canada. I'm particularly thrilled to thank both the Israeli and German consulates in Toronto for offering their support in sponsoring this program, along with our other sponsors whom I'll name in recognition of their contribution. These include UK Lawyers for Israel, European Lawyers for Israel, the Lawfare Project, UK Zionist Federation, Canadian Institute for Jewish Research, the Combat Anti-Semitism Movement, the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem, Muslims Facing Tomorrow, Michigan Jewish Action Council, the Council of Muslims Against Anti-Semitism, Scholars for Peace in the Middle East, the Atlanta Israel Coalition, and End Jew Hatred Canada. Thanks to all. Special thanks to DEIN for reaching out and offering us this program. Founded in 2017 by Jews and non-Jews, its mission is to counter anti-Semitism, the distortion of Israel's history, and hate propaganda, including hate speech. This work is done by conceptualizing and executing major projects such as 1948, the exhibition. This exhibition was visited by over 200,000 Germans physically before the pandemic and now via the exhibition's website. Like 1948, all DEIN projects are created using state-of-the-art public opinion making, mass psychology, and scientific insights into cognitive mechanisms. CAEF is a registered charitable organization that for almost 20 years has been focused on countering anti-Semitism and distortion of Jewish and Israeli history, defending free speech, freedom of religion, and the rights of all persecuted minorities. CAEF partners with many organizations to address critical issues and beliefs, and we strongly push for the collaboration among Jewish organizations and allying with both non-Jewish and Jewish Zionist friends. We are in a very serious, threatening battle that we can't underestimate now, and it could become more of a brawl. We urge every Jew to find their place of pride, to stand with Israel, to defy the haters, and to never succumb to the anti-Semitic, anti-Zionist rhetoric and lies. We welcome your comments, your efforts, and your financial support to enable us to keep moving forward. Please go to the CAEF website to subscribe to our bulletin and to make a donation. It's now my pleasure to introduce today's presenter. Let me also remind everyone that the webinar is being recorded and will be posted on our website and sent out to all registrants. Everyone listening today is encouraged to also share our webinars. All our recordings are online. Dr. Oren Osterer is known in Germany as one of the top experts on the founding of the modern state of Israel. He holds an MA in Media and Political Science and a PhD in Modern History, with a focus on German-Jewish relations, including with the former German Democratic Republic. He has been active in the fight against anti-Semitism and in promoting Israel for more than 20 years. Oren has been combining his scientific background with pro-Israel activism and the struggle in advancing Jewish causes in Germany. After serving as a volunteer in a Tel Aviv hospital during the Second Intifada, he moved back to Germany and became active in promoting International Israel Day. In 2015, he was the executive director of the biggest Jewish event to ever take place in Europe, the European Maccabi Games in Berlin. Since 2018, he has been the director of the 1948 project. He lives with his wife and 2 kids in Munich. You can submit questions to Oren, which he'll answer after his presentation. Just use the Q&A function, which is on your Zoom screen. If you use chat, we may miss your questions. You're welcome to use it and to communicate, but please try to get your questions onto Q&A. And now over to Oren.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you for this wonderful time we had preparing tonight. Here in Germany, it's already nighttime. I'm happy to have you all here. It's a big crowd from all over the world. Well, let me first tell you a little bit about our organization, DEIN, which actually is an abbreviation for democracy and information, but at the same time, it's a German term. It means yours. So we are your association. We are your charity organization. And tonight we want to specifically talk about our biggest project so far, not the only big one, but our biggest one, 1948, the exhibition. Before I go into the actual presentation, I want to little bit set our expectations straight. I know that most of you, a lot of people here came and are probably expecting a history lesson. Now, of course, I'm going to go into the content of the exhibition, and by this, I'm trying to lecture a little bit about the history, but there will also be a second part, because this project of the exhibition and the 1948 project is much more than only an exhibition, is ready to go global. So we are looking for international partners all over the world to adopt this project and present it and manage it and execute it in their respective regions and countries. As Andrea said before, DEIN was founded in 2017 here in Munich in Germany. Jews and non-Jews came together to form a platform to counter anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, which has also in Germany and in Europe grown to a state where it's almost unbearable. So we said we need to do something against it. Our chairman, Leo Zucharevich, is heading our organization. He's also, I would say, the mastermind behind most of our activities. We have an ideological focus, as Andrea said before, on countering the distortion of history and hate propaganda and hate speech. And our operational focus is on rather large-scale projects. 1948 is our biggest project. We launched a second project this year, which is called Wir Juden. In English, it's We Jews. It presents the whole diversity among the Jewish people and the many, many things Jews brought to this world and helped the world advance. And one of the bigger projects which will come up next year is called 1972. As most of you will know, in 1972 there was a barbarous attack on the Israeli Olympic team in 1972 here in Munich, and we are launching a project. It will be an online project on 1972. Since next year it will be 50 years. This project is not only focusing on the terror attack of 1972, but it will take a broader view on Islamist and Arab nationalist terror in total. Why did we do 1948? Well, our assessment when we got together in 2016, 2017 was that anti-Israel propaganda is certainly at new heights, or certainly reached new heights since the Second Intifada. And most crucially, we analyzed that the discourse on the Israeli-Arab or Israeli-Palestinian conflict was pushed back from 1967, from the Six-Day War and its consequences, back to 1948, thus attacking not, or let's say not discussing whether the West Bank is a disputed territory or liberated or occupied, but the discourse today is about Israel's very foundation. And those who try to attack Israel, the enemies of Israel, are attacking on all spheres, all levels, legal, ethical, moral, and historical grounds. And that's why we came up with the idea and the project to do something on 1948, to go right there where the discourse is taking place. 1948 is certainly has certainly become a game changer in Germany, insofar as that for the last 40, 50 years, I think the situation here in Germany and Europe, probably around the world, has been the same, that those who are enemies of Israel or who are anti-Semitic, I don't know what's the difference, but we have always reacted to what they have been doing instead of being proactive ourselves. And what's happened here in Germany with 1948, the whole subject of the founding history of Israel is now where we set the discourse, where we say what has to be discussed, what can be discussed, and from what perspective. And now the enemies are trying to run after us, and we're not running after them anymore. So that is maybe the central strategic scope and the central strategic goal of 1948, to be proactive, to set the agenda. It's a 360 degrees project. I will get back to that in a minute. We are regaining sovereignty over the discourse on 1948 and beyond in many regards to Israel history. 1948 is uncovering the truth about Israel's founding history, and it's exposing propaganda narratives, especially issues or topics like refugees, international law, land possessions, and some more. And it's conveying a broader understanding of Israeli reality today beyond daily headlines, because what we see is that most people, and it will be the same around the world, they experience Israel or they hear about Israel through media, through headlines, through daily news, and they cannot put this into any historic perspective. And this is one of the big things that we've reached with 1948, with, as Andreas said before, 200,000 people who have actually visited the exhibition alive, and many, many more who have visited the website, which I will come to in a minute. 1948 is a huge success story in Germany. It premiered on May 14th, 2018, so exactly on the 70th anniversary of Israel's founding here in Munich. We had one set of this exhibition, and demand just exploded. We were bombarded by emails and by demands to bring the exhibition to different places. So we produced 2 more sets. Those 3 sets in total were completely booked out, shown at more than 60 places all over Germany, among them schools, high schools, universities, city halls, county offices, local parliaments, state parliaments, churches, even in courts it was shown, and many, many NGOs offered their facilities to show 1948. We have tons of press reviews on our website. We do publish, or we do update it on a regular basis. It's, I don't know, 150 pages by now or even more. We had almost no opposition to 1948 so far. There is a little bit of opposition. I might get into that later on, but we were ourselves quite surprised that we were facing not too much and foremost not too serious opposition to the exhibition and its content. We gained support from various groups from all different backgrounds and from many, many individuals. I will just name a few later on. And so this is a success story that, at least in the German context, in the pro-Israel context, has never been seen before. I want to briefly show you a few pictures. These 4 pictures are all taken at the premiere in 2018 in Munich. There was a huge event with around 500 people, many of them being VIPs from Munich and the state of Bavaria. In the upper left corner, you see a guided tour that I gave for our most important private donors. On the top left, you see Professor Benny Morris, who was given actually the keynote at the premiere of this exhibition. His keynote was being held in the big synagogue in Munich. And on the 2 lower pictures, you see some impressions of people actually then walking through the exhibition. Now, you don't see 500 people on these pictures, because there was also a buffet in a different room, but there were 500 to 600 people, and it was an amazing event. And from that day on, 1948 was, if I may say that, rolling all over Germany. Here in the upper left corner, you see the University of Halle, which is one of the major cities in East Germany, where the exhibition was presented. And the upper right corner and the lower left corner was the opening night at the Berlin City Hall in Charlottenburg. A huge success in Berlin, and it was the first show that we had in Berlin. By now, we have been to Berlin 3 times with the exhibition. And in the lower right corner, you see the opening event at a high school in Bavaria. We had, I think, around 10 to 12 high schools already all over Germany, and there are many, many more who actually want to show it, but have been so far held up by the pandemic. Here also on the top right corner, you see me giving a tour for a staff of a college in Baden-Württemberg, which is a state right next to Bavaria. In the upper left corner, you see the county department or county office in Karlsruhe, one of the big cities in Germany. In the lower left corner, maybe the most interesting location that we had, that was the major courthouse in Cologne, the city where I was born. And in the lower right corner, you see a library of quite a small town called Mehring, not far away from Munich. So we have all different kinds of locations, all different kinds also of sizes of cities and locations and towns that have shown 1948. When we showed the exhibition in Berlin, as you saw before, one of the participants was the Federal Commissioner for Jewish Life and the Fight Against Anti-Semitism in Germany, Dr. Felix Klein. And when he walked with me through the exhibition, he was amazed and approached me then and said, listen, I want to be the patron. I want to have this all under my auspices. Okay, I want to be like the head to present or to represent the exhibition in Germany. We were very thankful. Of course, we took on the offer, and since March 2019, he has been our patron. You can read his statements. There are many, many more statements by quite famous people, journalists. For example, Kai Diekmann, who is one of the most famous journalists in Germany, and others that I will name later. I want to give you just part of our board of advisors. You might not know most of them, but I think that their positions do speak for themselves. So one of the most important consultant, if I may say so, was actually Professor Benny Morris, who's held his keynote at the premiere. And the key sentence that he was saying in his keynote was that the exhibition 1948 goes a long way to correcting some of the distortions of history embedded in the traditional Palestinian narrative. Some of us would say Palestinian propaganda in the Palestinian narrative regarding these events. Now, there is, as I said, many, many more people who have been have given testimonials for the exhibition. You find the list on our website, and we're happy to share this list with anybody who is interested. As I said, also, we have plenty of organizations that have supported us. These are probably the most important organizations. You have Keren Hayesod, that most of you probably know. You have the Central Council of Jews in Germany. It's a very important organization. You have some local Jewish communities, but you also have the International Christian Embassy in Jerusalem. And of course, you have the Federal Commissioner for Jewish Life and the Fight Against Anti-Semitism. And then there's plenty of organizations who have been active in organizing local presentations of the exhibition. This is students groups, this is Christian groups, this is local city administrations, and so on and so on. Jewish, non-Jewish, we have a few Muslims organizations who have joined the cause, and they are all have locally organized the exhibitions at their specific places and cities. Now, I now want to go a little bit into really the content of the exhibition. If I was to present to you the whole exhibition, all 30 panels, it would take at least 90 minutes, but I want to save some time for us. So I will show you all the exhibition panels, but I want to talk about a few in more details. But this is the table of contents. It's 30 panels in total. The German version has actually 32 panels because we added 2 panels that speak about the situation of German Jews before 1933, so before the Nazis actually came into power. 2 very interesting panels, but they are probably less interesting for an international audience. So we reduced the English version to 30 panels, but if anybody, and this is one of my goals tonight, to motivate you and to convince you to adopt this project to your countries, and if you want to add panels in that speak about Jewish life in your respective countries, of course, we are very open to this. It shouldn't be the focus of the exhibition. The focus of the exhibition is the founding history of Israel. So there is actually what we produced was an audio guide. So you can walk through the exhibition and you can just take your smartphone, scan the QR code, and you have an audio guide which explains for about 30 seconds each and every single panel. Okay. Now, of course, we're starting with the ancient history of Israel. You know, there were 2 kingdoms, and the temple in Jerusalem was destroyed twice, and Jews were expelled twice, once to the Babylonian exile, and then by the Romans all over the world. We talk about that. Of course, we do add some, or we wanted to add or to make clear that Jews, once they were expelled from their homeland, always had the dream of coming back. So Zionism maybe became a new political organization in the late 19th century, but the dream of Jews to return to their ancient homeland has been inscribed in Jewish prayers ever since, and it's one of the key motives of Jewish, even religious life all through the ages. We also talk a little bit about anti-Semitism, not too much actually. This exhibition is not about anti-Semitism, and it's not about the Shoah, the Holocaust. It really focuses on the founding history of Israel, of modern Israel. But of course, you cannot leave out the topic totally. We talk, of course, about Zionism and Theodor Herzl and the first Zionist Congress in 1897 in Basel. Now, what we also did about Zionism is that we tried to explain, or we tried to extract the key elements of Zionism, okay, and has to do with physical training and physical work, because when Jews got back to this country, that country was not really developed, and I'm not talking about being a country being developed in modern terms, but in terms of the 19th century, that country was not really developed, that the Hebrew language was modernized, if you wish, and speaking Hebrew among Zionists, especially among the first pioneers in the late 19th century, was something that they did. It was part of the rules of the game. Yeah, it was largely secular movement, and the pioneers were largely living a secular life. And by doing all this, they were actually trying to display that the anti-Semitic stereotypes are really totally absurd. We do represent, of course, or we do show the Ottoman Empire, which ruled for about, or exactly 400 years over this part of the world. And in the 18th and early 19th century, even before the collapse of the Ottoman Empire during World War I, people visited this region, which was just one region. It was not a country. It was not independent by any means. A few of them that are important, they actually wrote diaries, okay, and put down what they found there, which was not really a lot. What you see here on the left, and the picture in the left, is the founding of the city of Tel Aviv in 1909. A very nice story, which I will not get into details yet. And on the right-hand picture, you see 1 year later already the Rothschild Boulevard in Tel Aviv, which today is, one of the central spots in Tel Aviv. And this is the first kiosk, the first small shop, which still exists today. Not in this design, in a different design, but it does still exist. Of course, there have always been people and tribes and rulers who came to this region. And so we represent all of them, or the ones that are really important. They being Christian or Muslims or any other religion, and Jews also always returned. As you can see here, these are some examples of Jews that have returned to the land of Israel all through the ages, from all parts of the world. So also the idea of Zionism and actually going back, returning to the land of Israel, is nothing that just came up suddenly in the 19th century. There were always Jews who took up this voyage back to Israel. This is maybe one of the more important, or that I would like to go into, because one of the hard arguments, or one of the discussion points that is always being brought is, okay, there were already people living there, which is true. The country at the end of the 19th century was not empty. At that time, there were about 500,000 people living there. The majority was what you see up here on those two pictures, what we say Felachen, that's at least the term we use in German. So it was Arabs, farmers that in most cases did not own the land that they were actually working on. They were renting the land from big landlords who in most of the cases didn't live in the land. They lived in Beirut, or they lived in Damascus, in different places in the Middle East, but most certainly not in what was back then part of this part of Palestine. By the way, the term Palestine back then was not used. It was never used by the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire had a different term. It was called Jut Urdun, which is like the district of the Jordan. The Jordan being the river. The term Palestine actually was invented by the Romans 2,000 years back when they expelled the Jews, and then came up again actually in Christian contexts. And what you also see here is the city of Jericho and the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, which by the end of the 19th century were far from what they are today. Even Jericho is being maybe the second most important city in the West Bank today, next to Ramallah. Back then it was were some huts, but not much more. So there were about 500,000 people living in the area where today there's around 13 million people living. And whoever has been to Israel or even the Palestinian territories knows that there is still room for many more people to come. It's a small country, it's a small land, but there is still room. Just think about the desert. So back then, the end of 19th century, 500,000 people, where today you have 13 million people living. One of the most impressive developments that the Zionist movement actually was successful in doing was the Jesuit Valley. Okay, you have three pictures here in 1902, just after the Zionist movement actually bought this territory from the Sultan. It was really wasteland, and in 1910 you see it was already agriculturally cultivated. And this is a picture of today. It's one of the world leading role models in how to transform wasteland into agricultural blooming land, right? There is one aspect in history that has always, one part of the propaganda against Israel has always been that the Jews, they robbed the country from the Arabs, which is not true. They bought it. The contracts are out there. And the other propaganda piece that is always out there is that the Jews just took that land, which was already at the time of the purchase was already good land, which is not true. And in 1937, the Peel Commission, a so-called British Royal Commission, came to Palestine. Of course, in 1937, the British were already the mandate power in Palestine. The Ottoman Empire had collapsed 20 years before. And the British sent a commission, actually because of Arab violence that had been going on since 1936, heavily going on, and this Peel Commission was there to find a solution for the end of this Arab terror and violence. And one of the key sentences in the report of the Peel Commission was that the Arabs claim that the Jews have obtained too large a proportion of good land cannot be maintained. Much of the land now carrying orange groves was sand dunes or swamps and uncultivated when it was bought. This was in 1937. And in 10 years later, actually, the commission that came up with the UN partition plan formulated similar sentences in their report. Now, talking about the Peel Commission in 1937, this is one of the key milestones, if you wish, that has by many historians and many people been neglected. But you have to understand that in 1937, the Peel Commission actually came up with a solution to the Arab-Jewish, as it was called back then, Arab-Jewish conflict, saying that 70% of the land shall go to the Arabs and 20% to the Jews, and 10% shall remain an international zone. Now, imagine that. The Arabs in 1937 could have had 70% of what they wanted, and the Jews could have had only 20%. Now, it's very ironic to hear that the Arabs actually declined that offer, declined that solution, and the Jews actually, well, not embraced it totally, but were actually said, okay, we are fine with this. And I could go into the reasons for this. But it's very symptomatic to understand that already in 1937, when the Arabs that back then were not called Palestinians, at least not in the context or in the sense that we understand Palestinians today, that in 1937 they declined to get 70% of the country. Now, what is crucial about it is to understand that the idea of the two-state solution, which seems to be the consensus worldwide in the international community that the only solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict of today is a two-state solution. Whether you agree or not, that's a different issue. But the birth of the idea of a two-state solution dates back to the Peel Commission in 1937. This was for the first time that a commission actually came up with the idea of splitting this land into two separate national entities. For us, it was also important, and it's important for people to understand that in the very beginning, let's say in the 1910s, 1920s, 1930s, the relationship between Jews and Arabs in Palestine or in Mandate Palestine was not a bad relationship at all. Okay, they had very good relationships in economic issues, social issues, cultural, even religious issues. Probably the most famous proof for this was the Fisa and Weizmann agreement of 1919, when Chaim Weizmann and Faisal, who later became the king of Iraq, made an agreement that let's build a country together, basically, and let's see that what we can do for our people, but let's do it together. And even in the Israeli Independence War of 1947, 48, 49, there were some Arab villages, some Arab tribes and Druze, even more, that fought on the Israeli side. That's an aspect that has been totally neglected, that even Arabs in 1947, 1948, 1949 fought on the Jewish, on the Israeli side. So it's important to show that this conflict that's out there is nothing that is, given by nature or was given by God. It was made by men. And if we're talking about was made by men, one of the central roles in creating this conflict, of course, were the British as the mandate power. Now, one of the terms that is always out there, and which is a little bit misleading if you don't know the background, is the British mandate. We're always talking about the British mandate of Palestine. Now, there was no British mandate of Palestine. There was a mandate by the League of Nations, and the British were the mandator. They did not come up with this mandate, even though they were quite influential in the League of Nations. But there was a mandate by the League of Nations, and it was not only the British who decided to give them the mandate, and the British were responsible to do what was written in the mandate text. And for all of you who have not read the text of the League of Nations mandate of Palestine, this actually is a homework for everyone to do, because it's absolutely astonishing. If you go by the mandate, and the mandate is the one document, the first document that is relevant to international law in modern senses, the mandate by the League of Nations says that the whole country shall become a Jewish country. There was no mentioning whatsoever of an Arab or Palestinian country in that region. And when I say in that region, I'm not only talking about what we know today as Israel, the West Bank, and the Gaza Strip. I'm also including, because this is the mandate, I'm also including everything that we know as the Kingdom of Jordan today. Now, the British split this country up, took what is today Jordan and gave it to the Sharif Husseini, who lived back then in what we today know as Saudi Arabia. And when he was ousted basically by the Sauds in 1924, even a little bit before that, they separated this country, which was more or less a breach of the mandate text or the mandate itself, and gave it to the Emir Sharif Husseini. And out of this in 1946 came the Kingdom of Jordan as we know it today. But the British also played a central role in somehow using the conflict between Israeli and Jews, because they made different promises. Now, one of the promises that they made was written down in the Hussein-McMahon correspondence of 1915, 1916. Now, the British always claimed and have been claiming that in this correspondence, they made no real promise for anything. For sure, Mandate Palestine was not part of what they discussed with the Sharif Hosseini, even though the Sharif always tried to include Palestine. They were very firm, the British were quite firm to exclude this from all the discussions. But in the very end, if you go through the Hussein McMahon correspondence, there is no real promise, at least not as strong as the Balfour Declaration of 1917. Now, the Balfour Declaration of 1917, most of you will know, was the promise of Great Britain to support the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. And most people say, well, this is what Israel is basing its legitimacy on, and this is not true, because the Balfour Declaration, as much as it was a milestone for the Zionist movement, had no implications for international law whatsoever. It just became relevant once it was introduced into the League of Nations mandate. That moment, this document was so to say lifted to be international relevant in regards to international law. By the way, the Balfour Declaration is mentioned in the preamble of the mandate text, and there was, of course, some secret negotiations, some secret agreements between the French and the British, and originally the Russians were also supposed to be part of the famous Sykes-Picot Agreement of 1916. So the British did play their games, and you have many historians who say, well, the British, they were promoting a pro-Israel policy, and you have some historians who say that's not true. The British were actually following a pro-Arab policy. The truth is that the British followed pro-British policy, okay? So if it was to their advantage to support the Zionist cause, they did it up until mid-1930s, and from that moment on, they realized maybe it's not so good to support Zionism, maybe it's better to support the Arabs, so then they changed their behavior vis-a-vis the Jews and the Arabs, but at the end of the day, they did what was good to them and didn't really look at, okay, what's good for the Jews or what's good for the Arabs. And this, of course, caused part of the problem. But the even bigger part of the problem, I will just skip through. These are two panels who talk about how Jordan was founded, and that Jordan, you should know that, was the strongest army in the whole region, even when it came to the independence war. So Arab violence, and I talked about the Arab violence before in 1936 and 1937, but Arab violence has always been a reality in this part of the world. And even before the Zionist movement really gained up momentum, there were Arab clans, gangs who robbed Jewish small villages and Jewish small farms. But this was all, let's say, the regular kind of criminal activity, if you wish, that was part of living there. Now, in 1920, this Arab violence suddenly became quite anti-Semitic and quite nationalistic. So there were a massacre in Jerusalem. There was, of course, the very famous massacre of Hebron in 1929, where part of the truth is also that Arabs living in Hebron, they were hiding their Jewish neighbors and protected them from the Arab mobs. But in 1929, what happened after the massacres, the British, they evacuated all the surviving Jews from Hebron. And this was the first time, actually, ever since, that the city of Hebron was totally, and I'm saying this as a German, or as somebody living in Germany, Judenrein. So there were no Jews left in Hebron for the first time since thousands of years. And whatever you think about the Israeli or Jewish presence in Hebron today, you need to keep in mind that Jews had always been living there, and they never left because they wanted to leave, but either because they were murdered and massacred, or because the British evacuated them from Hebron. So the Arab violence gained more and more momentum. It was becoming more and more brutal up until 1936, 1937, and 1939. What is very important to realize and to know is that up until 1937, there was no Jewish violence against Arabs in Palestine. There was Jewish violence against the British as the mandate power, but there was no violence, no Jewish violence against Arabs up until 1937. And why did in 1937 Jewish underground groups, organizations, some call them terror groups, they most certainly used terror as a mean of advancing their causes. But why did it happen in 1937? The reason is what I explained before, because when they saw that the Arabs would not even agree to receive 70% of the country, and that they say, no, we want all of it, and we will not divide up anything, and we will not go into any compromise with the Jews. This was the moment that some Jewish underground organization said, okay, we will never be able to reach a solution with the Arabs. We will never be able to build, create, found our own country if we don't fight for it. So this was the beginning of Jewish violence in Palestine. But for about 20 years prior to that, there was violence from the Arab side against Jews constantly. Now there's a second person who plays a crucial role in why the Arabs became so violent, especially in 1936 and the years after that, but also even before. And this was the guy who you see on the upper left image, sitting with Adolf Hitler. It was the so-called Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, Amin al-Husseini. Now, who was this guy? First of all, he was a anti-Semite 100%. He was a militant. He was named the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem. That was a title and a position which had never been existed before. His father was the Mufti of Jerusalem, but being the Grand Mufti, he was not only the religious and spiritual leader of the Arabs in Palestine, he was also named the political leader of the Arabs in Palestine. And he was a total enemy of any peaceful solution, any compromise with the Zionist movement. And he ended up actually during the Second World War, spending most of those years in Berlin, in Germany. And only in the last, I would say, 10 to 15 years, historians, scholars have really uncovered his role. In the decades before, historians have always said, well, he was not really an important role. He was not, nobody took him for, nobody regarded him as a serious person. And partly that's true, because the Arab rulers around Palestine, they didn't take him to be a serious person. Okay, they were rather laughing at him. I would say they thought he's more of a clown. But for the Arabs in Palestine that lived in Mandate Palestine, he certainly was the most important political figure. He had the most power over them, because also he was, up until the Second World War, he was a protege of the British. And as I said, he spent most of the Second World War in Berlin. He was given a radio station called Berlin Cesen, so it was a radio channel next to Berlin. And what he did basically is he took the Nazi propaganda, especially the anti-Semitic parts of this propaganda, he translated it into the Arab language and sent it via radio from Berlin into the Middle East. He translated Mein Kampf, the famous book by Hitler, and he was actually also commanding an SS brigade of Muslims in Bosnia. So there were Muslim SS soldiers under the German Wehrmacht, commanded by the Mufti of Jerusalem. You should read about his story. His life is quite interesting. After the Second World War, he was captured and was to be tried as a war criminal. He was captured by the French. He somehow escaped. Nobody knows how. And the rest of his life he spent in Egypt, teaming up, if you want to say, with the Muslim Brotherhood that was founded in 1928. In Egypt. And what's interesting, and also a lot of people don't know that you had, this is the lower picture here on the right hand side, you had the Nazi party groups in Palestine. Most of them were, or all of them were Germans, non-Jewish Germans living in Palestine. There was the community of the so-called Templars. That's a very specific issue of German, Palestinian, German Jewish relations, if you want. But there were actually NSDAP, so Nazi party groups active in Palestine. Most historians, and of course it is true, say that the first Arab-Israeli war, which the Jewish side calls the Independence War and the Arabs call the Nakba, we might get to that in a minute, say that this war started in 1947 or 1948. But the truth is, as I've tried to explain before, that at least a civil war was broiling already in the years before that. So what we did here is we listed some, of course not all, of Arab violence against Jews, and we also, and that was important for us, we also mentioned Jewish violence against Arabs, because one of the criticisms, or one of the some critics say, and they have obviously never seen our exhibition, they say, well, this is one-sided, and you don't say that there were Jewish groups who were using violence and so on. We don't hide that fact. We talk about Jewish violence. We talk about the events at Der Yassin. I don't want to go into detail, but we certainly don't hide anything under the carpet, if that's a pronoun in English. We don't hide anything from what's been going on. And of course, there was also more Jewish violence after 1937, but just to give an understanding that not from nowhere, out of the blue, suddenly a war started between the Jews and Arabs, and then the state of Israel and the Arab states, the neighboring states and some more states. Of course, the partition then of divided Palestine. Why is the partition of divided Palestine in 1947? Because as I've said before, the mandate was covering not only what we regard as Israel, West Bank, and Gaza today, but also what is Jordan. And when the British separated that part, which was, by the way, interestingly enough, was called the East Bank. So you know about the West Bank today, but Jordan was called the East Bank. When they separated, when they split the East Bank from the mandate, this territory was already split, which was at least, which was once promised to the Jews, all of it was already reduced by almost 80%. So the partition that took place in 1947, or which was supposed to take place in 1947, 1948, was actually a partition of an already divided territory. Now, the term East Bank, interestingly enough, comes up even in the 60s in Palestinian literature and in Palestinian academic works. I will get into that maybe in a minute. So the term East Bank for what we call Jordan has been existent in Arab writings way down into the 60s, even after the Six-Day War. You have academics, for example, from Lebanon, who speak about the Arabs who flew from Palestine to the East Bank. But East Bank has already been Jordan for 20 years back at that point. What you see here is a picture of UNSCOP. UNSCOP was the United Nations Special Committee, which, as I said before, came up with this partition plan. And it's very interesting to see who was on this commission. It was headed by, I think, Sweden. There was no superpower represented, so the Soviet Union and the USA were not represented in UNSCOP. There was no Arab country. There were Muslim countries. There was Yugoslavia, which was partly Muslim. There was Iran. There's a very nice quotation from the Iranian representative, which you find actually in one of the documentations on UNSCOP. And of course, we show the maps. What you see here on the upper left map is the whole territory, which originally was the mandate territory, so including Jordan. And then below that, you see when Jordan was separated, so almost 80% of the territory. And the larger, somewhat larger map gives you the partition plan of 1947, which, of course, as you see it here, never came into being. So let me speak a few minutes about the Independence War, or the first Arab-Israeli war, starting in 1947, the day after the partition plan by the United Nations was accepted by a 2/3 majority in the General Assembly. Historians, and they do rightfully so, speak about two phases of this this independence war. The first part of this independence war started right after the partition plan was, as I said, accepted by the General Assembly, up until the moment that Israel was founded on May 14th. And this was mainly a civil war between Jews and Arabs in that territory. There was no Arab country, there was no Jewish country so far. So the people that were still living formally, at least, under the mandate power Britain, were fighting a civil war. And in this war, in this civil war, you have, again, two different stages. The first stage being that the Jews are being on the defensive. And this was the case up until March, April 1948. So from December 47 until March, April 48, the Jews were totally on the defensive. They did not gain any territory which was beyond what was meant to be theirs anyhow by the partition plan. Just in March, April, somehow the Jews were capable and able to go into the offensive, and they were following two strategic goals, mainly by their offensive. One was to really gain power over those territories which the partition plan wanted to be Jewish anyways. So it's the territory which you see here in the three darker areas, to really gain control over this territory, because just because the UN General Assembly decided so didn't mean that Jews were actually in power in all of these three places. So this was the first strategic aim, to gain power, to gain control over those territories. And the second one was, more interestingly and more had more consequences, was that it was quite clear to the Jews that when they will declare their independence in their national state, that all the Arab states surrounding this area will start an invasion. This was crystal clear. It was crystal clear by the statements that the Arab leaders made during the General Assembly sessions regarding the partition plan. It was clear in all they did. They summed up their armies, which were, some of them were not so strong. As I said, the Jordan army, called the Arab Legion, was quite a strong army, was the strongest army in that war. So it was clear that once we as Jews, once we declare a Jewish country, we will be faced with a multiple number of Arab states. Now, then the Jews went into the offensive to be able to actually hold back the invasion of those countries, of the Arab countries. And so they actually gained control over territories which were not to be part of them, but it was mainly the territories that were border territories, where it was clear that the Arab countries would use these routes, these territories, to try to invade. So this strategic goal to actually gain control over parts that have not been declared Jewish by the partition plan was crucial in order to have any chance to survive the invasion of the Arab countries. Now, I think I'm a little bit going too far into details. And of course, the second part of the civil war was then when Israel was founded and 5 Arab armies, supported by other contingents of other armies, invaded, and Israel was strong enough and lucky enough to resist this invasion. Let me finish here. Of course, we're talking about the Arab refugees and why they actually fled. Most of them were not expelled, even though there was some expulsion by Jews. Arabs were expelled also by force, but most of them left because panic was among Jews. Among the Arabs. We of course talk about the UNRWA. We also talk, of course, about the Jews who have been expelled from the West Bank completely and from other Arab countries. Now, I want to stop here. If you want to take a look at all of the boards, you can certainly do that on our website, which does not feature the English version yet, but we will get to that in a minute. Let me just continue with the presentation. I will take 5 to 10 more minutes. I hope you can bear with me. I knew this was going to be my biggest challenge to stick to our timetable. We showed this exhibition in more than 60 places, and then Corona came, okay? And on May 14th, 2020, again, the Israeli Independence Day, we launched the website 1948-web.de. You find all the exhibition boards there, of course, in German, and you have some extra features. And this year, for the first time, we also published a catalog of the exhibition, which I have here with me. It's beautiful. I will go into that in a minute. This is the home screen of our website. I'm not going to show you the website now. I was prepared to, but we don't have the time for it. So you can take the tour. You can look at only the pictures. You can look at all the maps separately from the actual panels. You can listen to the audio guide. The catalog is one of the big successes within the success. In March, we printed 500. The first edition was 500 prints, and it was gone within 4 weeks. And then we printed a second edition this month, and 1,000 prints. 800 of them were already pre-ordered in August, and the remaining 200 were gone within 3 days. And now we're looking at a third print or third edition in February 2022. You can take a look into the catalog for a second. I did that for you. It just gives you an idea that, of course, the catalog, the layout, the design of the catalog is different from the actual panels, right? All right. Hold on. And these are some example pages out of the catalog. You see it's a different design because it's a book and it's not as big as our panels. So what's next? We see that, well, at the moment, the pandemic in Germany is really, really bad. It's gone really bad again, quite out of control, to be honest. But we will regain momentum in 2022. We already have 10 presentations who are fixed, among them the Palace of Justice in Nuremberg, where the war criminal trials after the Second World War took place, State Parliament of Baden-Württemberg, Town Hall Kaiserslautern, University of Trier, and many others. And we believe and hope that we will come back to pre-corona status in 2023, meaning all 3 sets will be completely booked out. And the catalog, which has now gone out 1,500 times, of course, will be heavily distributed via the physical presentations of the exhibitions. And what's next? We will finalize the last steps and the last development in 2023. Of course, 2023 being the 75th anniversary of Israel's founding, we already have signed or agreed on some very specific, very good advanced educational project with schools and state ministries of education. In Germany, education is organized on state level, not on the federal level. And my baby, if I may say so, the project that I'm really behind it is the virtualization. Okay, we're gonna add a 3D tour online. We're gonna add holograms, interactive ludic elements, animations that you can experience when you go into the actual exhibition. So when you go and see the physical panel, the panels themselves, you can use again a QR code or some other marker to have it on your smartphone. Or when you visit it online, you will have the chance of meeting Chaim Weizmann and Theodor Herzl and Ben Gurion, and they will actually guide you through the exhibition. What else is next? You are next. Okay, 1948 seriously has been a game changer in Germany. Of course, we are only at the beginning. This has been going on for 3 years. And as I said before, we are still developing some features, most of all the virtualization or the animation, if you wish. And it's ripe now to go global and create a worldwide impact. We offer a range of support from our experience that we have gained here in Germany, from many events that you can do surrounding the exhibition, from fundraising, from, let's say, return of interest, if I may say so. Okay, how can you actually get back what you financially invest? So there's a range of support that we are offering. We're looking for organizations around the globe that are engaged in the fight against anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, and that are capable and motivated to organize and adopt 1948 as a project. We offer the exhibition material, including the audio guide, including not the catalog, a small booklet which comes with the exhibition. We can train your teams to be good guides. We train them with historiographic sessions, argumentative sessions, and so on. We have optional services that we can offer. We can do a translation into any language. Of course, anyone can do that, basically. There's the English version already. We can help with tailored graphics. We can help with the content management and the campaigning on the web. We can even organize face-to-face meetings. We can do any service that you would need that is in your demand for realizing 1948 in your country. What do you have to contribute? You have, of course, to organize and manage the exhibition. You have to be, that's one of our main focuses, and I think it should be for the exhibition anywhere it's shown, to be really in touch with educational institutions and to be to carry values that speak for democracy, for freedom, for peace. And of course, you need to be able to set and execute a PR strategy accompanying the whole project. Adopt it to your respective countries, make 1948 a global initiative. 2023 is the perfect time for us to make this move altogether, okay? And if you are really interested in getting to more know, if you're interested to learn really how you can adopt it and what we offer in detail, then just get in touch with me. You have my email here, you have my phone number, I'm on WhatsApp. I would be very, very glad to hear from all of you, actually, after today. Thank you for your attention, and please excuse my my lack of feeling for time tonight.
No problem. Thank you. No, I'm thrilled that you did take as much time and got through as much material as you did, because people were asking to see the exhibition. So thank you for that. We did get a few questions. I think that many you actually covered in the presentation itself. And I want to just stress something I put into the chat. If there are other Canadian organizations, Jewish or non-Jewish, that would really like to help us bring this exhibit here, Canadian Anti-Semitism Education Foundation is very supportive and keen, as you can imagine, and honored that Oren reached out to us. So if you would partner with us, I'm sure we can find a means to bring an English exhibition here and move it around. And I would think, Oren, that a primary target audience would be high school. Have you had it in the schools in Germany?
Yes, of course. I said we had about a dozen high school already. And actually the first presentation next year, if Corona is not, will not get worse, is 6 weeks at the Anne Frank High School in Munich. So, the name already is quite interesting. Yes, and it's one of our focuses also in 2023. As I said, we already have agreements with the schools, but also state ministries of education that we use and leverage on the 75th anniversary of Israel's founding.
Okay, because I think that's a real serious target group for us. We're seeing already the rise of anti-Zionism within the schools, and I think we have to counter it. And I would imagine, I don't know if you've experienced it, that we would hit a wall with the pro-Palestinians that are trying to keep all the Jewish history out of the schools and denying our truth, our history, the facts themselves. So we'll look forward to working with you on that. I want to thank everyone that attended today, and I remind you that we will send out a recording just as soon as it's available. And I thank all of our sponsors again, and I want to wish everybody not only a good weekend and a good winter as I look at the snow falling here, and happy Hanukkah, Chag Sameach. Everybody stay well. And we'll be back. I have another webinar on December the 6th that is co-sponsored. It's a presentation from Kulanu Canada, CAEF, and several other organizations about the history of the Jews in Chennai, India, which was formerly Madras. And you'll hear about some of the 400, 500-year history, and also how anti-Semitism has driven the community away. So look forward to seeing you all again, and take care. Bye now.